Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Western Pearl Street Reconstruction Community Meeting. We are just going to give folks a minute to join, and then we will get started shortly. Welcome, folks. We are just giving folks a few minutes to join, and then we will get started shortly on the Western Pearl Street Reconstruction Community Meeting. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining. We just want to welcome everyone this evening to launch the Western Pearl Reconstruction Project. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Ward 1 Councilor Matthew McLaughlin and Ward 4 Councilor Jesse Klingon. Councilor McLaughlin, do you want to get us started with some welcome remarks?
If I could wait 1 minute, and I'll be right with you.
That sounds great. Maybe Councilor Klingon, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Just happy to be here, excited to see these improvements. I will reiterate what was said to me, to anybody listening, that, nothing has been set, that this is to elicit feedback on possible different options, in terms of, a refresh, to Western Pearl Street. So I'm looking forward to listening to this and getting feedback from my constituents and any interested parties. And so thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Councilor Klingon. Councilor McLaughlin, does it work now well, or does it work well for you now?
1 second. Yes, hello everyone. This is Matt McLaughlin, Ward 1 City Councilor. Just getting home because I was stuck in traffic a few blocks away from my house, which I'm sure is a common story for many of you. I just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Councilor Klingon. We share Broadway to Pearl Street together. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of it to redistricting a while ago, but you have 2 people representing you on this project as well as a lot of travelers. And I say what Klingon said. So I just dealt with a lot of work on Pearl Street, and for the most part, I think it came out really well. And aside from the traffic calming measures, which were very welcome, I was very happy and impressed with the way city staff facilitated outreach. I don't think anybody was not heard in that entire process, as well as the Tough Street project that we're working on. So I expect there to be a lot of outreach on this. This is just the first of several meetings. People will be out knocking doors. We'll be doing surveys. So if people don't feel like your voice is heard tonight, don't worry, because we'll be talking to you several times before anything happens. So I'm going to jump back into my house right now and log in, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Councilor. Well, welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you here. I'm going to jump into tonight's purpose, outcomes, and process. So we aim to create a safer, more accessible, and more comfortable Pearl Street between McGrath Highway and Medford Street. In this meeting, we will introduce the project and we'll learn about the goals, guiding plans, potential design options, and ways to engage during the design development. We really want to hear your transportation safety concerns on Pearl Street and your priorities for its reconstruction. We also want to better understand how you view the opportunities and challenges between the different design options. We will present a slideshow on the project and then have a question and answer session for community input. And over the next month, there'll be more opportunities to engage and share your feedback at this stage of the project. So I'll now share some logistics for tonight's meeting. So as you might have heard as you logged on, we are recording this meeting. We'll post a recording of tonight's meeting on the project page, which is at somervillema.gov/westernpearl. You'll find your camera is off through the duration of the meeting, and we will enable your microphone only when you're speaking during the question and answer portion. Throughout the meeting, we'll conduct some optional poll questions, so we'd love for you to participate if you're interested, just to learn a little bit more about who's in the room and ways that we use the street. And after the full presentation, we'll open the meeting to discussion. So we're going to start first with questions that came in through the chat and then move to spoken comments and questions. You can send your written questions anytime during this meeting to the host, which is me, Kate White, through the chat chat box, and I'll read them out loud during the discussion so that all participants can hear the questions and the answers to the questions. And if you have any technical difficulties during this meeting, please don't hesitate to email transportation@somervillema.gov or call 781-254-3947. So next we have our first optional poll. I'm going to launch a poll. We want to learn a little bit about more about you and who's joining us this evening. As we described, we'll have a couple this evening. You'll see a pop-up in a small window in your Zoom application in just a second, but here are the first 3 questions for you. So we want to hear, where in Somerville do you live and kind of your relation to the street? What are the general ways that you travel? And then how you use Pearl Street today. So I've listed those questions here on the slide, but I'm also going to launch the poll. So you should be able to see that in the pop-up window now, and I'll give folks a few minutes just to start to participate. We've got 24 folks joining us today, and so I'll kind of list out the percentages of that 24 person attendance. So great, we're seeing some folks start to participate in the in the poll questions. Thank you so much. I'll give you about a minute more. No worries if you don't participate in these questions, they're just optional. We also have some similar ones in our feedback survey, which will be released later this week on the project website. So give folks about 30 seconds more. And it looks like we're just getting a few more people taking question 3. So I'll give that a little bit more time. Just 10 more seconds. So if you want to submit, make sure you submit. Wonderful, about 92% of folks participated. So I'm going to end the poll now and read back some of the results. So you should be able to share those or see those results as well. So we had 23 out of 25 people participate in the poll. Of that, about 22% live on Western Pearl Street, 35% live within a 5-minute walk of Pearl Street, 39% live in Somerville but further than a 5-minute walk, and about 4% don't live in Somerville. Of the main ways that folks generally travel, we've got 81% identify as riding a bicycle, 52% using a car, 19% using the bus, 86% using rapid transit, so that includes your Green Line and MBTA subway lines, about 5% using commuter rail, 10% using rideshare, which are your Ubers or Lyfts or taxis, and 86% either walking or rolling. And rolling is a term we use to kind of include using a mobility device like a wheelchair. So in the ways that we use Pearl Street today, we've got about 22% said they live on the street, 39% say they use the street to travel to work, 11% use the street to travel to the high school, 6% use it to either take their kids to the East Somerville Community School, 6% use it to take their kids to Capilano, 6% use it to take their kids to the Edgerly, and 11% use it to take their kids to another school or daycare in the area. 6% said they don't use it, they don't live on the street, but use it as their primary way to get to and from their home. And 39% said they go to a business or businesses on the street. Lastly, about 28% use the street to get to McGrath, and 28% use it for other reasons. So thank you so much for participating. We really appreciate getting to know our attendees tonight. So Justin, you want to take us to the next slide? Wonderful. So I'm just telling a little bit about our agenda this evening. So for our presentation, we will share a bit about who we are and what we do, why Western Pearl Street. We'll provide an overview of the project and discuss some of the existing conditions. We'll talk through some of the tools we can use to improve Western Pearl Street and discuss the design considerations. We'll then go through the street design options and then close out with what's next and ways to engage. And following the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. With that, I'll hand it over to Justin to jump into our presentation.
Thanks, Kate. We want to start by introducing the team of city staff working on this project and discuss some of the values and guiding plans that we're going to bring to our work on Western Pearl Street. So first of all, what does the Mobility Division do? The project is being led by the Mobility Division, which is part of the city's Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, known as OSPCD. Mobility aims to make our streets safer for everyone who travels through them by implementing street reconstruction projects, traffic calming installations, as well as quick build projects. Mobility also facilitates a number of programs and initiatives such as Safe Routes to School, multiple free or reduced transit pass programs, and the Blue Bikes bike share system. My name is Justin Schreiber, and I'm a senior planner. Also from Mobility, we have Viola Augustin, senior planner, and Kate White, transportation planner for outreach and engagement. We will be working closely with the engineering division of the Department of Infrastructure and Asset Management, who will be responsible for the construction phase of this project. We're joined tonight by Rebecca Wright, Senior Project Manager for Streetscapes, and the engineering division is led by Brian Postlethwaite, Director of Engineering. I also want to share a bit of background on the values that shape our work. For all projects, we start first and foremost with the goal of keeping people safe on our streets. We also aim to increase access to public transportation and to create more sustainable transportation options for people to get around the city. We have 2 existing ordinances that underscore those commitments. The Complete Streets Ordinance from 2014 broadly stipulates that streets should be designed for all modes of travel, all ages and abilities. The Safe Streets Ordinance passed earlier this year sets specific targets and timelines for implementing street safety projects, including protected bike lanes from the Bicycle Network Plan, accessible parking spaces, and pedestrian and transit improvements identified in the Vision Zero Action Plan. In addition to these 2 ordinances, there's a number of long-range plans that contribute to our vision for this project. Somerville's comprehensive plan, Summer Vision 2040, sets the city's broad values and goals for community-oriented planning. The Climate Forward Plan ensures that our projects also support the city's mission to decarbonize our transportation system. The ADA Transition Plan helps us to make our streets more accessible to everyone, and I want to note that the ADA Transition Plan is undergoing an update currently as well. Finally, the Bike Network Plan includes our vision for a network of safe infrastructure for people biking. In addition, Vision Zero is the city's commitment to eliminate deaths and serious injuries from our streets, and the city's Vision Zero Action Plan provides a framework to help us achieve that goal. We know that despite our best efforts, people will make mistakes, and they'll continue to do so. Therefore, we have to design our streets to account for these mistakes, to be forgiving, and to ensure that mistakes do not result in fatalities or life-threatening injuries. The graphic here illustrates some of that thinking, showing how reductions in vehicle speeds have a huge effect on how likely someone is to survive a crash. This is why we are so focused on speed reduction in our projects. Next, let's talk about why we are reconstructing Western Pearl Street now. Each year, the city has funding to make surface level street improvements through the Pavement and Sidewalk Management Program. This is a data-driven program to maintain and improve our roadways and sidewalks managed by the Department of Infrastructure and Asset Management. Streets are prioritized based on factors such as pavement quality, sidewalk accessibility, traffic volumes, network importance, and in conjunction with overall city goals and construction plans. The result of that prioritization is a list of priority streets to be reconstructed, which is published annually. Streets are categorized by various project types. Complete street at intersection projects are full reconstruction projects that include a complete reevaluation of street design to improve safety and access for all users. In full street projects, we're generally resurfacing the surface of the street, but only minor traffic safety improvements are incorporated. In sidewalk-only projects, the city is simply reconstructing the sidewalks to be fully accessible. In curb-to-curb paving projects, the city is simply repaving the full roadway. And then lastly, we have partial paving projects where the city is just repaving the travel lane areas of the roadway. You can find much more info about the Pavement and Sidewalk Management Program, including an interactive version of the map shown here on the Engineering Division's webpage, as well as by following the links on this slide, which we will share on the project webpage and in a direct email to you following the meeting. Western Pearl Street is designated in the paving program to be reconstructed as a complete street. Western Pearl Street is also included in the Bicycle Network Plan, which was published by the city in 2023. The plan aims to provide a connected network for people of all ages and abilities to bike safely and comfortably across the city, and it identifies a priority network of bicycle infrastructure to be implemented by 2030. This plan was further codified by the City Council's recent passing of the Safe Streets Ordinance early this year. On this slide, next slide, we have a zoomed in view of the bike network plan in the neighborhood of this project. And you can see Western Pearl Street is designated for protected bike lanes in both directions, and it is on the network of streets to be implemented by 2030. Next, we'll talk a little bit more about the limits and scope of this project. So when we say Western Pearl Street, we're referring to the section of Pearl Street from its intersection with McGrath Highway, across its intersection with Walnut Street, and all the way up to the Gilman Square area at the intersection of Pearl Street and Medford Street. This map shows the extent of the project, as well as some of the neighborhood context, which we will discuss in more detail shortly. Next, we'll talk about what's included. So currently, Western Pearl Street does not meet most of the goals, values, and plans that we discussed in previous slides. To meet our goals for increasing street safety, for improving accessibility, incorporating more sustainability, and creating a more comfortable street, we aim to reconstruct all the sidewalks along Pearl Street from Medford Street to McGrath Highway, and to pave the street from sidewalk curb to sidewalk curb. We also aim to identify locations for new trees, replace tree stumps, and consider tree bump outs or expanding tree wells to support longevity of trees. We intend to add accessible curb ramps to all existing crosswalks, and we will explore opportunities for new crossings at key locations. In addition, we will install safety improvements like raised crosswalks and intersections, as well as other traffic calming tools. We also intend to install protected bicycle facilities with this project. Finally, we aim to incorporate clear corners at each intersection to increase the visibility for people driving, turning, or otherwise moving through intersections by making sure people do not park too close to intersections. So this graphic shows the types of improvements that are definitely a part of the project, those improvements that could be a part of the project based on your input, as well as those improvements which are definitely out of scope of what we can accomplish with this project. So I want to point out that things such as substantial utility work, street lighting changes, and green stormwater infrastructure are not included in the scope of this project. This next slide shows the overall anticipated timeline for the project. The green boxes indicate periods of community engagement, while the orange boxes indicate times we are advancing the design internally. So currently we are at the very beginning of the process to reconstruct Western Pearl Street, starting our first round of engagement where we aim to gather your input on your safety concerns for the street, as well as your priorities for how it should be reconstructed. After this phase ends in November, we plan to select an overall design direction for the project and work to develop an initial design based on the feedback we've heard, in addition to analysis of data we plan to collect, such as vehicle speed, vehicle volume, and parking utilization. We will share that design with you and hold an additional round of community engagement early next year. Following that, over the spring and summer of next year, we'll refine the design further, and in the late summer to fall, publish an updated design for an additional round of community input. Finally, we will work to incorporate this last round of feedback, complete and publish a final design, and prepare for construction. We anticipate that the construction window for this project will be from spring 2026 to fall 2027. At this time, we can't say specifically when construction will begin, but it is anticipated to be in that window of time. I'm now going to turn it over to Viola to discuss some of the existing conditions on Pearl Street.
Thank you, Justin. The existing conditions. In the next sections, we will discuss and review the neighborhood context for Western Pearl, talk about the Western Pearl experience, cover sidewalk, crossing, road and traffic conditions, and the state of the bicycle infrastructure. Western Pearl Street between Medford Street and McGrath is located pretty much in the center of Somerville and surrounded by many important locations as seen on the map. In blue, you see number 1, City Hall, number 2, Somerville High School, number 3, Central Library. Shown in green are the open spaces for active and passive users within a few minutes walk from Pearl Street. Number 1, the newly opened fields, Revis, I actually don't know how to pronounce it. Number 2, Gilman Square Triangular Park at the intersection of Pearl Street and Medford Street, and number 3 at Leather Park. Besides single-family and multifamily residential houses, this relatively short stretch of Pearl Street, about 0.3 miles, finds a number of small businesses and other uses that are pointed out and shown in yellow. The numbers point to a few nodes along Pearl Street and adjacent locations. Number 1 are the collections of gas stations and businesses, including the restaurant Sama in the center of Gilman Square. Further east along Gilman Square, number 2 are the Mad Oyster Studio and the Pearl Street Park Affordable Housing Building. Number 3 indicates the businesses and studio around Skilton Avenue, and number 4 are the Pearl Street Market Convenience Store and the Community Laundry. And then finally, we'll reach McGrath with number 5 that points to the Pearl Street gas station. When designing Pearl Street, it is important to understand the needs of all those users and neighbors, from residents of all ages, artists, and business owners and users of the businesses. Gilman Square and Western Pearl Street are also connected to a couple transportation options shown in purple. The Gilman Square Green Line station, hopefully everybody has been using that quite a bit, is located on the plan with the square number 1, and the purple stars indicate the entrance areas. Along Pearl Street also runs the number 80 bus, and the bus stops are indicated with number 2 squares. And number 3 shows the shared community path. All the number 4 squares show existing bicycle lanes. Starting from the left, the two-way lanes on School Street between Medford Street and the community path, the one-way lane going from Pearl Street to Walnut Street. I don't think that's right. Oh, yes, on Medford Street, and the contraflow bicycle lane on Marshall Street from Pearl Street to Broadway. We want to just point out a few items on comfort and overall experience. Some sections of Western Pearl Street provide shade and an overall more pleasant experience, and you see that in the picture looking east between Walnut Street and Jasper Street. Other parts, especially McGrath Highway, have no trees, and in a few places along Pearl Street, trees have been removed. The tree stump that you see on one of the pictures speaks of the tough environment for trees to survive and the need for larger tree wells. The picture of residents placing chairs right next to the Pearl Street Park building and the people sitting on benches in the Gilman Square Park clearly show the desire for shady and gathering places. This set of pictures kind of demonstrates that the path for pedestrians is often not easy, especially for people pushing strollers or are in need of assistance or visually impaired. The sidewalk shows different levels, cracks. We see different pavement and narrower widths that make the sidewalk not continuously accessible. The crossings as shown in these pictures need to be improved or made fully accessible. Curb ramps are entirely missing, or if they are there, are broken or lacking tactile warning pads that are needed for the visually impaired. At important locations, crossings are missing. The picture on the screen demonstrates a common scenario: people trying to cross Medford Street to most likely get to the Gilman Square Green Station based on the suitcases they carry, and they do that at a desired location without a crosswalk. Also, all side streets should have accessible crosswalks, and as seen on the other picture, there is no crosswalk at James Street. Currently, the number 980, as I said earlier, runs along Pearl Street, and it goes between Arlington and Leechmere. And the bus stops seen in the pictures either provide shelter, but in that case narrow the sidewalk quite a bit, or they do not even offer seating or shade. So the bicycle infrastructure, Pearl Street connects to or is close to existing bicycle infrastructure, as was discussed earlier on the neighborhood context. So this map shows again all these connections, but I want to focus and point out the current gaps. And indicated by number 1, we see the missing bicycle connection on Medford Street coming from the community path down to Pearl Street and further to Medford Street. It also points out between Medford Street and the neighborway connecting at Skulton Avenue, there is no bicycle infrastructure. And number 3 shows the lack of bicycle lanes connecting to and from the McGrath bicycle lanes, and these are currently being implemented. Roadway and traffic. Similar to the pavement conditions of the sidewalks, the roadway pavement is deteriorated. Cracks, patches, and holes are seen in these pictures. Looking at the volumes of cars, the average number of cars per day traveling on Pearl Street is about 5,170 cars, and it's pretty equally distributed in either direction. 2,945 travel eastbound and 2,225 westbound. With no bicycle infrastructure in the high speeds, and this is a little bit out of order, I just realized, during non-peak hours, it is no surprise that the number of people riding bikes is fairly low at about an average of 90 per day. And now we get to the speeds, which are actually fairly high during non-peak hours. So occasionally as high as 55 miles per hour. About 17 vehicles on average per day drive at 40 miles per hour. And remember again the slide that Justin showed on Vision Zero, anything above 20 miles per hour raises the chances of a serious crash substantially. So with that in mind, a quarter of vehicles drive more than 25 miles per hour at 25, and a small percentage, 5%, drive over 32 miles per hour. Want to briefly mention parking. Besides a small section near McGrath Highway, street parking is available on one side of the street. And I do want to point out that between Walnut and Marshall Street, parking on the north side was removed to ensure safe passage for emergency vehicles during the Medford Street and School Street closures as part of the Green Line construction. And in anticipation of changes in Gilman Square and on Pearl Street, such as the Home Inside redevelopment and the current reconstruction project we're talking about, parking has continued to stay removed. Before we go into design, we want to point out how we can improve the safety and comfort of an experience on Western Pearl Street, and introduce some of the tools. For crossing improvements, hopefully you all are familiar, we can look to construct raised crosswalks or intersections to improve the crossings. Raised crossings increase visibility, slow people driving, and improve accessibility for people using wheelchairs and other mobility devices. Another option could be curb extensions or bump outs, which would widen sidewalks and shorten the distance for people crossing. Again, these would also increase visibility for both people driving and walking, and would encourage vehicles to slow down while navigating a narrower roadway. All new and existing crossings will include accessible curb ramps, which are transitions from sidewalk to road that they will have appropriate widths and slopes and include detectable warning tiles for visually impaired pedestrians. And the 2 images shown are examples of raised crosswalks with curb extensions on Holland Avenue and on Oliver Street. Protected bike lanes create dedicated space for people biking, and we protect them by physical separation from cars, and that can be achieved by raising the bike lanes to sidewalk level or creating barriers like curbs or landscaping. We just want to emphasize protected bicycle facilities provide an option for bike riders of all ages and ability by increasing overall comfort, reducing crashes and injuries, eliminating the threat of dooring, reducing conflicts between vehicles and people biking, and encouraging slower traffic speeds by visually narrowing the streets. And lastly, I want to talk about transit improvements. We probably not hopefully, but most of us have experienced it. Waiting for a bus exposed to the elements can be challenging. Floating bus stops are a great way to decrease the waiting time by allowing the bus to be quicker when picking up and dropping off passengers, resulting in reduced delays. They also improve the waiting experience by providing a separated area adjacent to sidewalk and bicycle lanes, thus reducing conflicts. And Shelters and benches protect passengers from the elements, therefore enhancing the comfort while waiting. So right now we summarized existing conditions and introduced some of the tools we can use to create a better and safer experience on Pearl Street. Before we finally go into the design options, we want to point out two important design considerations. Most of us are probably familiar with the Gilman Square streetscape. In 2020, the city published the 20% conceptual plan for Medford Street between School Street and Pearl Street, and that plan included parts of Pearl Street up to Stilton Avenue and also School Street up to the community path. You can see on the concept plan, the proposal is a two-way bicycle lane along the south side of Medford Street and Pearl Street, as well as a 6-foot wide sidewalk and a 6-foot wide furniture zone on both sides of the street. The 20% concept plan was further advanced to a 60% drawing set, and in the 60% drawing, the treatment carries through all the treatments I just mentioned, and it carries through to Stilton Avenue. And that is kind of what you see in the rendering. It looks down Medford Street. At the intersection of School Street, you see the two-way bicycle lane on the right side, and it kind of curves around Pearl Street. Sorry, Justin, it doesn't matter if in the slide. Just want to mention the goal was to advance the 60% set to 100% drawing set, but we were waiting for development on the Homan side. And so that is still the case because we don't know the future of the Homan side yet. We're going to not advance the 60% at this point. Now we can go to the next. Part of the vision at the 20% concept was for the Medford Street Bridge to be closed. And the 60% set included the Medford Street Pearl Street intersection in preparation for a bridge closure. And you see that here in the rendering at the bottom. You look down Medford Street to Pearl Street, and to the right is the bridge, and the whole intersection is raised to an elevation that is making the bridge accessible. And that leads to the considerations that played into the vision for a closed bridge. The bridge at the time was closed for the Green Line construction, and surrounding intersections worked at a reasonable level. The second was the need for more open space that we heard at that time from high school students. So the bridge closure gives us open space opportunities. And the other thing around the Green Line station opening, there was a lot of discussion that the station is not accessible from Gilman Square. So with a closed bridge, we actually have the opportunity to create an accessible path. And that is shown in that diagram to the right. And our consultants for the 60% did a feasibility study, and we believe we can create a path that is less than 5% in a very short area, 8.5%, which is still accessible. And that's what you see in the cyan color. So with that, I will give it back to Justin.
Thanks, Viola. Another consideration for the design is the space available on the street. Pearl Street today, Western Pearl Street, is approximately 15 feet wide in total, with about 33 feet from curb to curb. We can break this down further to determine how much space we have on the street for design changes. So first, we can assume that sidewalks will remain at least as wide as they are today. We typically are not willing to consider narrowing pedestrian space on the street. This means that we have the existing curb-to-curb width of 33 feet to work with for potential design changes. Assuming two-way traffic remains, we can narrow travel lanes so that they take up only approximately 21 feet or about 10.5 feet per direction. This means that unless more significant changes are considered to traffic flow, only about 12 feet remains for many types of improvements, such as protected bike lanes, curb extensions, floating bus stops, parking, planting zones, and more. So it's fair to say that Western Pearl Street is quite constrained, and we will not be able to fit everything we might like to see on this street. So with that in mind, what are the street design options? We would like to present 3 illustrative options for the cross section of the street. These options are meant to represent a general design direction, so there may be hybrids between them or options where the cross-section could potentially change as you go down the street. We want to hear feedback on these options as well as others that we should consider. Option 1 would install protected bike lanes in both directions, maintain vehicle traffic in both directions, and remove all on-street parking. This option provides a safe bike facility in both directions, meeting the bike network plan vision. In addition, this option has the benefit of preserving the flexibility for a future Medford Street Bridge closure. There are also some drawbacks, primarily that there is no additional space for facilities such as parking or loading zones, expanded sidewalks or curb extensions, bump outs around trees, and more. We could also not fit floating bus stops in with this option, meaning that bike lanes would be unprotected along the bus stops along the street. Next, we have option 2, which will convert Pearl Street to a one-way for vehicles, install protected bike lanes in both directions, and maintain a parking or flex zone. This option also provides a safe bike facility in both directions, meeting the bike network plan vision. However, unlike option 1, this option would provide a flexible space for facilities such as parking or loading, curb extensions, bump outs, and more like that. One major drawback, however, of this cross section is that it would likely mean the Medford Street Bridge closure to vehicles is no longer possible. If we remove a direction of travel from Pearl Street, we will most likely need to preserve at least the opposite direction of travel on Medford Street. This option also requires a detailed traffic analysis to understand its impacts, as well as extensive coordination with other city departments. This could require additional changes to signal timing, pavement markings, or other changes in other nearby streets and intersections. So in total, it's possible that this option could extend the time frame of this project before the street is resurfaced. Finally, we have option 3, which would install a protected bike lane in one direction on Pearl Street, install a quick build protected bike lane in the opposite direction on Medford Street, and maintain a parking or flex lane. This option also has the benefit of preserving the flexibility for a future Medford Street Bridge closure. This option would also provide a flexible space for facilities such as parking or loading, expanded sidewalks, curb extensions, and more. However, this option does not meet the bike network plan vision, and in one direction, there would likely need to be an alternative bike route, which we would design to be less than 5 minutes long. So on this next slide, we have a summary of all 3 options that could be helpful that we can refer to as needed during the discussion portion of this meeting. And I want to remind folks that there could be hybrids between these options. There could be preferences to change cross sections between them at certain key locations. There could be other cross sections that you can propose as well. So we do want to hear how you would prioritize between these different options, but you can certainly suggest alternatives or hybrids as well. We also want to directly address why we are presenting option 3, which does not meet the bike network plan vision. First, there is a safety concern with not providing a place for people to pull over. We have seen sort of ever increasing delivery demand on our streets, leading to behaviors such as parking in the middle of the street, on bike lanes, and on sidewalks. This particularly impacts people with mobility disabilities or those pushing strollers, sometimes forcing them into the street. We've learned through previous projects that these behaviors can occur even when we provide alternative parking options. In addition, and this is important, Western Pearl Street is not like most streets in the bike network plan designated for protected bike lanes in both directions. On the vast majority of those streets, we can still maintain a flexible space for parking, pedestrian improvements, floating bus stops, and more, but we can't do that on Pearl Street given the space we have. Finally, removing all parking and flex space is a significant change that requires community conversations like these to help us understand the impacts, discuss the trade-offs, and come up with potential solutions. And we committed to having these conversations as a part of creating the bicycle network plan. We want to have a more expansive discussion about the bicycle network in this neighborhood to make sure that we're moving ahead with a useful design that also preserves flexibility for the future development of Gilman Square. Regardless of which option is chosen, we're committed to providing a useful and safe bike network in this neighborhood. I'll now turn it over to Kate to talk through next steps.
Thank you, Justin. So I'm going to share a bit more about what comes directly next in the project and how you can engage in the design development. Justin, want to take us to the next slide? We're just back one more. As Justin described earlier in the presentation, we are launching this project in the fall 2024, and we'll work to develop design through the end of 2025. He mentioned kind of the different engagement windows, so I just want to kind of call out the three main engagement phases and kind of break that down for you all this evening. Want to take us to the next slide, Justin? So right now we are in the pre-concept design stage, and so we're really looking to hear from you to help us better understand the context of Western Pearl Street. We are looking to provide insight into your transportation safety concerns in the area, share input on the potential design options, the design option directions and trade-offs, which Justin just shared. Share your public transit experience and help us understand what would make the project better. Help identify critical crossings and intersections to prioritize for improvements, really to just help us understand what would make the project better. In the late or kind of in early 2025, we aim to bring back a concept design, and we hope you share your feedback on the overall concept design and safety improvement proposals. In addition, we hope you ask questions about the details of the design that really help us dig into the further development along the course of this project. Next summer, following the release of the updated design, we hope you review the more developed design and share input on whether it meets our project goals, in addition to sharing how the design makes you feel. So really, there are kind of three major stages that we're looking to hear from you, both kind of in the beginning to help us identify issues. Then we'll come back to you with kind of a initial design direction. And then in that summer to fall 2025 timeframe, really kind of looking to kind of get comments on the near final design. When we move to finalize design after reviewing all the feedback we've collected throughout the design development, we'll then work to spread the word about the anticipated changes. And so you'll hear from us again, kind of in the late fall 2025 or early winter 2026. And during this time, we're happy to field questions, but our main goal at this time will be to communicate the implementation plans in preparation for construction. We want to provide a range of community engagement opportunities to meet you where you are and create different opportunities for folks to share their input or kind of talk through and digest the designs. We'll launch each community engagement phase with a larger meeting. So tonight's is virtual. We anticipate our next one in February or March to be kind of an in-person open house, give you the chance to come, talk to the project team one-on-one, review the designs, and kind of get into the questions. We'll also have surveys where you can detail more of your feedback. So at this stage, we aim to hear about your transportation safety concerns and priorities. And in February, we'll look to hear your feedback on the concept design. And following next summer, it'll be on that updated design. All our surveys will be available in English, Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Nepali, and simplified and traditional Chinese. And we'll also have an online public input map. So it's just a large map where you can geolocate comments and kind of describe specific issues right there on the map. And we'll have a printout of that map when we do all of our street outreach so that you can have the same experience just in person with us. We are committed to doing direct outreach, especially community members who might often have more barriers to engaging in planning processes. So we began some of this work with actually doing a series of youth workshops with Groundworks Green Team to understand more the priorities for street design that our young adults have in our community. Then we aim to meet people where they are, including at high pedestrian traffic locations with our street outreach pop-ups. Our next one is going to be on October 15th, the intersection of Medford Street and Pearl Street at 4:30. But we're going to do a series of these throughout the whole year. We'll also be facilitating meetings for specific community groups like Pearl Street Park residents. And then later in the design, we'll be offering virtual office hours where you can sign up. And if you prefer to connect online rather than in person, you'll have that opportunity to talk one-on-one with us. We'll also be connecting with businesses one-on-one. So that's going door to door to each business to learn more about their business operations and their transportation needs. So we are also committed to keeping you up to date through direct emails. So if you registered for this meeting, we're going to keep you on our update list. And so you'll get a direct email probably from me, kind of with all new releases of information and links to new materials. We also will have information available in our mobility newsletter. So if you're interested in getting monthly updates, we encourage you to subscribe to that. We'll also be continuing to flyer homes in the project area, bus shelters, and getting out the word in city social media channels. You also might receive kind of city alerts, so please subscribe to those. These are great opportunities to hear about upcoming meetings or construction information in your area, and you can see them by phone, text, or email. We also aim to go to many of our citywide community events over the next year, including our upcoming Summer Streets Monster Mash, so please feel free to stop by our table while you're enjoying some of the Halloween festivities. And lastly, we'll connect with our transportation-specific city advisory committees and commissions to hear their questions and feedback. So for what comes next, please check out our project webpage at somervillema.gov/westernpearl. We'll have that survey up online shortly, and I'll send you a reminder email direct to your inbox in the coming days. Please add comments to our public input map, and again, subscribe to our monthly newsletter for project updates. Come talk to us. We are going to do our street outreach pop-up, as I mentioned, on October 15th. If the weather's not looking so great, we'll likely reschedule October 30th. So if you're interested in coming out, just double check that website before you join. And then our Pedestrian and Transit Advisory Committee is hosting a community walk, not only to kind of gather and learn more about the street, but also hear from community members. So if you're interested in joining, this is on October 21st at 6 p.m. at the intersection, or beginning at the intersection of Pearl Street and Medford Street. And at any time throughout this entire project, please share your questions to our team. You can email us at transportation@somervillema.gov, or you can call us using 311 at 617-666-3311. So folks, thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We've got one more poll question for you, and then we're going to get ready for the question and answer portion. Again, this is just kind of a quick optional one, sharing the following list of options. Please share how you feel at this time about the project. I'm going to launch that in that pop-up window now, and I'll read through some of the answers shortly. But again, just kind of, let us know if you're excited, if you're most excited and have some concerns, or you need some more information, or you're mostly concerned. We'd just love to hear how you're feeling at this time. I'm going to just focus a few minutes. You can start to input some of your questions in the chat, and we'll begin to read them shortly. Awesome. So I see about 82% have participated, so I'll give folks a few more minutes, and then I'll read them back out. Okay, I don't see any more adding, so maybe I'll end it now, and then we can jump into discussions. So sharing those results out back to you, we got 30 out of 35 folks participate in the poll. So out of the following list of options, please share how you feel this time about the project. We had 27% share that they're excited, 40% share that they're mostly excited but have some concerns, 10% said that they need more information before they can determine how they feel, 3% said they're mostly concerned but undecided about some things, 17% shared that they're concerned about the project, and 3% selected other. So just want to say thank you so much for participating. We're now going to go into discussion. Awesome. So just again, want to reiterate that we'll first address questions in the chat and then move to spoken questions and comments. So feel free to send in those written questions now, and I'll read them back out. We'll probably do this for about approximately 20 minutes, and then we'll move into spoken question and comments. If you want to, speak any of your questions or comments, just make sure to select that raise hand button in the bottom of your toolbar, or in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We do ask folks to, maybe primarily keep it to 2 minutes per person, so we can make sure that all folks can participate. And if you're joining by phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. And again, we have our contact info if you have any technical difficulties. So I'm going to start off with some of the questions that we received earlier in the presentation. It's about some of the data available about the street. Justin and Viola, could you speak to any of the crash statistics on the on Pearl Street?
Yeah. thanks for the question. I don't have a graphic handy for you, but that's certainly something we can post on the webpage. There have been crashes on the street. It's usually between 5 and 10 per year. The majority of those are property damage crashes, meaning things like people's cars got damaged, although there have been a few injuries, and there's no record, in the last 5 years of any fatalities on the street. And we're happy to post a more detailed analysis on the project webpage if that would be helpful.
Thanks, Justin. So we actually had quite a few questions regarding the 80 bus route. And so given the changes coming up for the 80 bus route, so if folks are not aware, the 80 bus route has been slated to be eliminated in the bus network redesign. And so the questions around if this is being considered, how much do we plan? One person mentioned they're a big fan of floating bus stops, but will there be buses running on this section of Pearl? In addition, how do we plan for that now in the reconstruction?
Yeah, as Kit mentioned, the MBTA's bus network redesign does eliminate the 80 bus in this area. So the bus that now goes to Arlington Center goes down College Ave and terminates in Davis Square instead. Some of the rationale behind that was the remainder of the route being very close to the Green Line extension. However, the tricky piece of that is that the bus network redesign is rolling out in a number of phases, and we do not know currently when that change would take place. And it's likely to be a number of years before that change takes place. The MBTA has asked us for the time being to plan for the 80 bus route to be continuing on this section of Pearl Street. And I will point out that floating bus stops are a much more efficient use of space on the street. They only take up 40 to 50 feet instead of more like 100 feet for a pullover bus stop. So they actually are quite an efficient use of street space along the street. And we can brainstorm ideas of how these spaces could be turned into other things later. Could they be used for plantings? Could they be used for additional seating or benches? Could they be used to provide bike racks? All these are potential options that we could brainstorm for the use of that space if the 80 bus were indeed to disappear.
Thanks, Justin. So the next question is regarding parking. So one person shared that they live on the section of Pearl Street where there's only parking on one side. So how would these options impact our section? And then I have a follow-up question to parking after.
Yeah, I'm gonna quickly scroll back to the various options, just so you guys can see it while I'm talking. So in option one of the three options, there would be no parking on Pearl Street itself, and we would maintain two-way travel for a bike facility and two-way for vehicles. Options 2 and 3 do maintain a parking or flex space, and the way they do that is either by only providing for vehicle travel in one direction or only providing a protected bike facility in the other direction. So these are the three options on the table. Again, we can't say specifically how parking will be impacted at this time, but there's two options that include a parking lane remaining and one option that includes a parking lane no longer being included.
Thank you all. Sorry, just realized I was muted. That follow-up question to parking is, will there be alternative options for parking if current street parking is removed or reduced, both during construction and after?
Yeah, so part of our process for any street design, even if a parking lane were to remain, is to figure out how we can make better use of parking on the street. There's a number of ways we might do that. Currently, we have a lot of more longer term parking on the street. We'll talk to businesses and think about whether there could be loading zones or more short-term parking, potentially even parking meters to help encourage turnover to have more customers. And that includes in situations where there would be no parking provided on Western Pearl Street, looking into options on side streets. It's a little more complicated because there's some one-way streets in and out of Pearl. But in previous options, generally we're looking at nearby side streets and potential opportunities in the neighborhood where we can change regulations or make the parking work more efficiently in various ways. So that's definitely going to be a part of the plan, regardless of which option is chosen, some sort of parking mitigation plan.
Thanks, Justin. And I just want to note for folks sharing their comments in the chat, we really appreciate those. I'm focusing on the questions, reading them out loud now, but all your comments, we're logging them. And we're going to create a report at the end of this phase. So everything we heard, whether it's in the community meeting or if it's on the street or in our in our designated like small group meetings, such as Pearl Street Park, all those comments will be collected there so that everyone can see that after. And we'll review all that as we move into the next stages. Just want to thank you all for doing that and just know that we will be reviewing all those comments. So our next question is about some of the bicycle facilities. One question was, what direction is being considered for the one-way option?
Yeah, at this time, we don't have a selected or preferred direction for the one-way versions, either for bicycles or vehicles. And that's definitely something we want to hear your input on. Part of the decision-making process for that is going to be a traffic analysis to determine which option sort of makes the most sense for the various places people are going. But again, we do want to hear, what are the key connections you would like to make? And in a scenario where there's one-way traffic for bikes or vehicles, what are your preferences and what makes the most sense? What do you think about that? So at this time, we're considering all options, I guess is the way to answer it.
Continuing on bicycle facility questions, we have one that says there aren't bike lanes on the other side of Pearl, and so why do we need them on Western Pearl when the community path and Gilman Street have bike lanes that run parallel to Pearl?
Yeah. I think Viola talked a little bit earlier about the key connections on the street. So there's connection to McGrath, which in the near term is going to have quick build protected bike lanes. And in the longer term, it's going to have, more really nice, separated bike facilities as a part of the McGrath Boulevard project. There's also some neighborways in the area, both existing neighborways like the Gilman Square neighborway, which goes underneath McGrath and provides a way not to have to interact with that street. And there's a neighborways to the north of Pearl Street that have not been implemented yet. So that's another key connection. And as well, connections to the Green Line Station to Medford Street on up to City Hall.
Yeah, I might want to add to the need for many of the families from the Winter Hill Community School, from the Winter Hill School that are currently at the Edgerly School and at the Capuano. And we hear frequently from them that they'd like a very safe and straight connection to Pearl Street or to those schools. And that would obviously, Pearl Street would offer that. And then the question that it doesn't lead to anything, Justin said that it will connect to the protected bike lanes on McGrath, but it will also in the future, we are planning on the network plan to make the part of Pearl Street between McGrath and Cross Street a neighborway, and that was with the intention to provide that connection to the schools in East Somerville.
Thanks, Viola and Justin. We have another one around bicycle facilities. If the design does not include the bidirectional protected bike lanes required by the Safe Streets Ordinance, how will alternative protected bike lanes be included in this project scope rather than putting it off until a later time?
That's a great question. So I think folks saw in option 3, we proposed a quick build protected bike lane on Medford Street going the opposite direction of a quick build protected bike lane on Pearl Street. And the intent would be to implement that alongside this project, within the same time frame. We can't say specifically they'll occur exactly the same time, but the intent is for this to be an inclusive scope. And, that could include suggestions that we haven't made tonight about other facilities that should be provided in specific directions to sort of meet this idea of an alternative bike route. So the intent is to not put it off, but to do it sort of at the same time with this project.
Thanks, Justin. So now I have a couple of questions kind of around crossing facilities. We'll first start with bump outs, and then I have one around other tools in the toolbox. So one person shared that one concern is with bump outs. The idea makes sense, however, the implementation on some of the locations like Summer Street or on the School Street, Oxford Street, in my experience, have created different dangerous situations, as larger vehicles can only navigate turns by swinging into the oncoming traffic lanes. Can the bump outs exist but not be bumped out so far?
Sorry, it took me a moment there to find the button. Yes, so we'll definitely be making sure that the appropriate vehicles can make all turns. I will point out that we don't just want to design our streets around larger vehicles, because then we end up in a situation with wider streets and faster speeds. So we have to come up with a compromise between the biggest vehicle that might possibly use the street and the smallest. But well, all of the interventions are going to be engineered by a traffic engineer to make sure they're safe. And I guess the other thing I'll point out is that some of the discomfort that folks feel when there's bump outs is intended to help people drive more slowly.
Yeah, and I want to add and speak especially to the Spring Hill concern. We have learned a lot since that project was designed, and we're getting much better to coordinate with the Somerville Fire Department, and we do trial outs. We make sure that they review the designs very carefully. So as far as emergency access, we are starting to design our bump outs so that they feel comfortable. And that is really the largest vehicle. If they can make it into the streets, and everybody else should be able to make it, albeit be slower, which is what Justin already mentioned is our intention. Not that we prohibit people to turn, but we want them to turn slower.
Thanks, Viola and Justin. I have another one around crossings. One person shared that their 10-year-old walks the Artenziano and also to the library. The fastest thing would be for him to cross at Sarma and go up Medford, but I do not allow this due to safety. I ask that he goes up the four-way stop at Pearl and Walnut instead because as a signal and light. Would stop signs or light be considered for the Medford-Pearl intersection?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. I think at this time we can't say what the traffic control is going to be at that intersection. We definitely know there's a desire to cross the street there, and we intend to meet that desire. We don't know for sure if a signal and a light is possible, and there's different trade-offs to balance. The idea of a protected phase is great. There's also an issue where if we make folks wait in a place they don't want to wait, many people will cross anyway. So we'll be looking at all the different options here and coming up with something that we think is as safe as possible.
Thank you. Okay, so the next one is also about crossings. Would there be a possibility for flashing yellow lights and signs at the crosswalks at the Marshall Pearl Medford, which you were just mentioning?
At this time, we can't commit to early action safety improvements. We'll certainly look for opportunities to do so. So it's all the more reason to share those concerns with us. We can't commit to that improvements will happen sort of before construction on this project begin, but we're going to keep our ears open to potential opportunities to do so.
Yeah, and my apologies. I think that was just geared towards just general design and not in the interim. Sorry. It was more about our flashing crosswalk signs, flashing yellow lights being considered.
That's definitely something we will consider. It's another one of those things that when folks get used to it, the effectiveness really wears off. So our focus generally is on sort of physical traffic calming improvements, whether that's raised crossings or sort of making the road a little more curvy through something called a chicane. Physical feedback to folks driving down the street is generally much more effective than signs and flashing lights, but there still are cases where those would be warranted. So those are up for discussion as well.
Thanks, Justin. Okay, so now pivoting to some more about the process. One person, Ash, is wondering where we are in the process. Are there any decisions made as yet?
Yeah, no decisions have been made yet. That's, we're really here to launch the process. And, this meeting is not the meeting where a decision will get made. This meeting is just one of a number of opportunities to give feedback on this project. The next month or so is going to be that first engagement window. And then shortly after that, we intend to select a design direction for this project. So no, at this time, we have not begun a design. We don't have a designer on board. We're still in that initial outreach phase, talking both to you and also internally to different city departments.
Thanks, Justin. Our next question is around the prioritizing the bridge closure. So one person said, I really like the idea of prioritizing the bridge closure to make it easier to get to the T-stops. Can you share a bit about how much parking would be reduced if option 1 is implemented?
Sorry, Kate, could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch
Yeah, of
that.
course. My apologies. I really like the idea of prioritizing the bridge closure to make it easier to get to this T stop. Can you share a bit about how much parking would be reduced if option 1 is implemented?
Option 1 would mean that on Pearl Street itself, there could not be any parking provided. The number of spaces is something that we would bring to you guys in the future, but generally it means there could not be parking provided on Pearl Street itself. And then, in the future, if the Medford Street Bridge was closed to vehicles, that includes vehicles going to park as well. It would be, emergency access only, walking and biking.
Now pivoting to some more about traffic analysis. One person asks, do you have a plan for traffic backlog on Pearl Street? As it can be difficult sometimes to get out of the side street onto Pearl Street.
Yeah, so I think, generally speaking, folks can expect that there is going to be increased congestion during peak times. That being said, typically when we introduce a significant amount of traffic calming, we do see that, particularly folks that don't need to be taking this route could choose alternative routes, stay on streets like Broadway or McGrath. So there could be some impact and some reduced volumes, and we have seen that in our other projects. That being said, I think it's fair to expect that during peak times for a street that's meeting a large regional roadway that carries a lot of traffic, there will be some congestion.
So now going back to some of the Safe Street Ordinance components of this project, one person asked if the city chooses not to put protected bike lanes in both directions on Pearl Street as the bike plan describes, will they amend the bike plan and ask the council to amend the Safe Streets Ordinance?
If we were to choose that route, that is what we would need to do. We would need to amend the bike network plan and the priority network. And the Safe Streets Ordinance allows staff to do that. One thing I'll note is that if any facilities are removed from the plan to be built by 2030, there is an overall mileage target. So, the city would need to make up for that in other areas and potentially add other facilities in other places, in order to meet the alternative bike route that would be needed in that case. So I think the answer is yes.
Thanks, Justin. I just want to thank folks for sending your questions in. Probably in about 5 or so minutes, we'll pivot to spoken question and comment. We received some questions that are kind of outside of the scope of the project, so if we have some time, I'll get to them, but I am focusing on the ones around Pearl Street. Justin, I believe you kind of answered some of this, but we just got another one around, is there an opportunity for more immediate safety enhancements?
Yes, yeah, I think I answered this to the wrong question before, but generally speaking, we can't really commit to that, but we will keep, our eyes and ears open for potential opportunities to do so. So, we encourage folks to share their ideas for what, needs to happen in the short term, as well as what they want to see on Pearl Street in the long term. But definitely the focus of this team is completing a design in the next 12 months or so and being able to construct the street as soon as possible. And a lot of that is because it really isn't quite poor shape today, and it's just imperative that we work to upgrade those sidewalks and make them fully accessible.
So we have a question around development. One person shared that the developer, the Pearl Street development, has committed to install a raised crossing or pay for it to be installed. And this has been discussed with the Gilman Square Neighborhood Council. Have we spoken to this developer, and has this been incorporated into this project?
Yeah, I think I can safely say that I have not been made aware of that commitment, but it's something that we definitely can look at incorporating into this project. Um, Generally speaking, we probably don't want to have two construction crews working out there at the same time, but there's a few different models where something like that could be incorporated. And things like raised crosswalks are generally something the city is going to be looking to do anyway with this project. So, if anything, those kind of commitments can potentially supplement that effort.
Justin, if I could just jump in on that too. I mean, if that development does happen, I also understand that the developer is talking about activating Skilton Ave more, like having frontage of their building on Skilton. And I know that's part of the neighborway plan right now, right? Skilton or? Yeah, so improvements on Skilton would be, would also help if, depending on which option we go with this, that's a great alternative to Pearl Street.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, and Skilton would be, outside the scope of this project, so that's definitely something that we look to coordinate on.
Thanks. Now we have I'm going to do one more written question and then kind of pivot to spoken comment question. So folks, if you're interested in speaking, please raise your hand and then I'll begin to get you all ready so you can share your comments and questions. So our next question is around the Gilman Square area plan. So if we are in the information gathering phase prior to a 20% design, how does that square with the 60% design for Gilman Square from Pearl to School that you shared earlier in this meeting? Does that design constrain this project, or will that design be obsolete by this project?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That design will not be obsolete at this point. We will work with a 60% design set and will, at this point, try to make sure that we're not impeding the implementation in the future of the section between Pearl Street and School Street and the bridge closure. And that said, as we go along with the design and other opportunities arise, or if we go with an option, for example, that the bridge closure is not going to be part of it, that will obviously have an impact on it. And that was exactly, not the Pearl Street project, but that kind of flexibility on the Gilman Square streetscape was why we did not advance it to 100%, because we knew things are changing and we wanted to make sure that final development on the Homan side and what happens around the Gilman Square can be accommodated by the 60% design set. And all that within the spirit of providing protected bike lanes and wider sidewalks and incorporate that streetscape into the Homan side.
Thanks, Viola. So folks, I'm going to move to spoken questions and comments. Please raise your hand if you're interested in speaking. Currently, we have 3 hands raised, beginning first with David Tatarakis, then Aaron Bickle, then Katie Mason. So I'll cue you and kind of let you know where you are in the line of raised hands, and then allow you to unmute. So David, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi. So I live on Gilman Street, just off of Pearl Street. And I'm very excited to see that there's kind of robust plans for this section of Pearl Street. I bike along there pretty frequently, drive on there occasionally too. I would say I'm pretty in favor of option 1 of the 3 that you've shown. I think option 2 in a vacuum would be completely fine with me. But I think maintaining the capability to close the Medford Street Bridge to vehicular traffic is very much in the interest of the larger desire for development and transformation around Gilman Square. So I think maintaining that would be really important. I think option 3 would be very, very disappointing. I think missing out on an opportunity for 2-way protected bike lanes would be a real shame. So yeah, I really like option 1. Thanks for the work you guys are doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing, David. So next I have Aaron Bickle, followed by Katie Mason, followed by Antonietta Pinto. Aaron, you should be able to unmute now.
Perfect. Hi, so my name's Aaron. I live on Wigglesworth Street, which is a one-way side street that feeds into this section of Pearl Street. I commute solely by bicycle, but honestly, I would say that I much prefer option 3. And the reason for that is that, honestly, I hardly ride on this section of Pearl Street, even though I live right here, because it really doesn't connect to anywhere. And there's not really much of a plan for it to connect anywhere. Medford Street is not part of the bike network plan. Pearl Street and East Somerville is not part of the bike network plan. McGrath Highway is supposedly there will be these bike lanes. I kind of doubt that they'll be very safe to use. And And honestly, we already have really good infrastructure. The Gilman Street neighborway, the bike path, and the bike lane on Broadway is really all that I need to get around. So honestly, to me, there's a lot of pretty significant downsides to option 1 and option 2. Specifically, like option 1 seems nice, but not having any parking or pullover space, I think, is going to be a disaster. If you've spent any time over by Sarma, you know that there's cars, there's Ubers picking people up, dropping people off constantly. So what is that going to do to traffic on Pearl Street when there's people just stopped in the lane all the time? I also walk in this area really frequently, and I'd rather not see the road become kind of more dangerous and chaotic than it is now. And I think, honestly, we don't lose much by not having two-way bicycle facilities on Pearl Street. I'm not sure it ever really made sense for them to be part of the bike network plan in the first place, because, again, they really don't connect anywhere. I would say maybe the caveat to that is connecting between Marshall Street and Skilton Street, so that you can get from the Marshall Street neighborway to the Skilton Street and then Gilman neighborway, and that's really the only connection that you actually need. So I think that's kind of my thought there. I'd much rather see kind of bike connections that make sense rather than connecting to places that aren't going to have bike lanes anyway.
Thank you so much for sharing, Aaron.
Kate, can I just, I just wanted to thank you so much, Aaron, for that feedback. This is exactly what we're looking for. Not sure. Oh, okay. But I do want to make a correction. Pearl Street, as you know, is on the network, as is Medford Street. It is just not on the priority network. So if you look at the bicycle network plan, we have a vision for, long term, and then we prioritized streets for the short term, i.e. up until 2030. And on that plan, you're correct, Medford Street is not on the 2030, but it is overall on the network plan, as is the Pearl Street neighborway, which would connect from McGrath to Cross Street. So just wanted to clarify it.
Okay, fair enough. Although it looks like it's showing a one-way bike lane on Medford Street, is that correct?
It's a one-way from Broadway to School Street, but it's a two-way between School Street and Pearl Street.
Oh, right. Okay. So this is showing the current network plan. Yeah, because this is, based on the network plan that I've seen, there didn't show any bike facilities on Medford Street. And obviously Pearl Street was just rebuilt in a really nice way this year with no bike facilities. And honestly, I'd love to see the western side of Pearl Street rebuilt in a similar way to the eastern side that really prioritizes the pedestrians.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Just want to let folks know we have 2 additional hands raised. Next, we have Katie Mason, followed by Antonietta Pinto. So if you are interested in sharing your comment, please raise your hand, and I'll make sure to call on you shortly. Katie, you should be able to unmute now.
Thank you. I was going to mention, I do like some of the improvements that have been done on the eastern section of Pearl Street. But I think one big thing that's missing from both sides of McGrath is a proper double yellow line down the middle. So it looks like on the eastern section, you maybe have a 6-foot double yellow line, and then all the way till Cross Street, there's nothing. And so, especially currently, where we have a lot of extra space because there's no parking on the westbound side, there's a lot of people that use that as a pullover spot, or Uber drivers who sit there waiting for a fare. And so it would be great to have a double yellow line to make it a little clearer that there really is no parking allowed on that side. And with regard to businesses, I don't know if you are aware and going to reach out to the home daycares. There are several of them in the first block along Pearl Street. And obviously there's a lot of people pulled over to drop off and pick up kids.
Katie, thank you so much for that. Sorry, I just cut out for a moment. Can you mention again where you were noting the larger number of home daycares?
The first 2 blocks between McGrath and Jasper Street, I believe, has at least 2 home daycares.
Awesome, thank you. I wasn't aware of those, and as I run point on community engagement for our team, it's a really helpful feedback, and we will definitely look into connecting with those. Thank you. Wonderful. So next we have Antonietta, and then we have no additional hands raised. So if anyone else is interested, please raise your hand. If not, I'll pivot back to some of the written questions we didn't get to before we close out. Antonietta, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, I live on 195 Pearl Street, and I've lived here since 1985. And I'm very concerned about option 1, where you close out Medford Street, because that when Medford Street was closed for the Green Line extension, it created massive traffic on Pearl Street. Massive. It was so frustrating for me to come out of my driveway on Wigglesworth Street and go onto Pearl Street. I couldn't even get out of couldn't even go to work. I had to wait 10, 15 minutes, and I'm not kidding, because people would not give me a chance. Once in a while, you see someone nice that will let me go. So imagine having to deal with that every day. That's not a good thing. I'm with Aaron. I appreciate what he said. I agree with everything he said. And so my other concern, so that's option 3 is really the option that I like the best. The other concern I have is the parking on Pearl Street. If you take the parking off Pearl Street, the people that live around here, tenants and people that do own houses on Wigglesworth Street that do not have driveways, who rely on parking their car in front of their house, they will not be able to park there, because all the people that park on Pearl Street right now are going to park on the side streets. So what is that going to happen? It's going to create a lot of chaos. And you're going to see a lot of angry people. You're talking about bike lanes and safety this, safety that. What about safety of the people that want to park their cars? If you're going to have chaos, people just yelling at each other, and it's going to be so stressful. I think a lot of people are going to have parking anxiety, which is really bad. And so I'm very concerned, because as it is now, during street cleaning and snow emergency, some of my tenants, some of my neighbors asked me if they can park in my driveway, and I let them, So it's wonderful that you're doing all this stuff for bikes and this and that, but why can't you just put a green line, a green arrow on the street, and let the bikers go with the cars? The cars are not going fast during traffic time. They're not. And I see bikers and cars, being respectable of each other. And it's such a small section of Pearl Street. It's not that big. And so I don't see that you need to change anything. Okay, the raised sidewalks, I agree with that. But the parking should stay. And believe me, people are very cautious of the bikers. And during traffic times, people are going 10, 15 miles an hour, sometimes 5 miles an hour. So I don't see this thing about, you have the statistics that people are going 50 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. Okay, maybe in non-traffic times, maybe at night, but during the day, in high traffic times between 7 and 9, people are crawling. So if you do option 1 and option 2, I don't know how are people going to get out of their streets to go to work. The backlog of the traffic is going to be horrendous. And I've lived here for many years. I know what I'm talking about. And I'm very concerned about that. You really need to also look out for the people that live in this area. There are some, there are tenants, landlords, and some people don't have the option of having a driveway. So they rely on street parking. And I don't think it's fair if you pay taxes and you'd like to pay to park your car in front of your house. I don't think it's fair that you have to go down to Dunkin' Donuts to park your car because someone from Pearl Street used to park on Pearl Street is parking in front of your house. You really need to be aware. Or the other option is, I understand that you can make it specific stickers for parking for those people who don't have driveways, that only they can park in front of their house. I don't know if that's an option, because that's not fair to people to do that to them, not having a parking option,
Thank you so much, Antonietta. We really appreciate you sharing. We have about 5 additional folks with their hands raised, so we might move to the additional comment. But folks, please continue too if you have any questions to share them in the chat. So next we have Sean Kreitz, followed by Joel Paul, followed by Cyril Valet, and then Mike Ayali. Sean, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello, my name is Sean Kreitz. I don't actually live in exactly Gilman Square. I'm very close at 162 Sycamore Street in Somerville. And I'd kind of like to echo a little bit of the sentiments of the last commenter in the neighborhood. I really think that you have to preserve some sort of parking. And just as a general idea, I think that I live here. Like, I'm not a landlord. I'm raising my family here. And this idea of our options of getting rid of all parking in front of people's houses, I've seen it on Central recently. You're essentially devaluing people's property. There has to be some sort of room for parking. We have a lot of bikers. I understand that. They're biking. I actually work usually in the city of Boston a few days a week, and I can get out of Boston. And then as soon as I enter Somerville, especially through McGrath, it is a nightmare. Closing down that bridge is one of the ways to my house. It has been it's horrible. And what people do after 2 or 3 light cycles is they just run the red lights. I recently read the Somerville Times about how the city council is looking for the police to go and ticket more and not give warnings to everybody, and to like fine them with money. Why do you think this is happening? I mean, people are getting frustrated. No one can get anywhere. These protected bike lanes, listen, you should have some, but I just think devaluing people's property, taking away all parking, it's just gotten a little crazy. I try to get home Broadway. I try to get home McGrath. It's just gotten worse and worse. And when human beings get frustrated, they do things. I see them all the time. Of course, they're blowing red lights. They're absolutely frustrated. And not to, poop on your plan, so to speak, but, not everybody has driveways. People need to be able to park their cars in front of their own homes. And this request to excessively ticket and fine, I don't know, it seems a little ridiculous to me. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for sharing, Sean. So next we have about 4 additional hands raised. We have Joel Paul, followed by Cyril Valet, followed by Mike Ayali, and then Elizabeth Hammond. Joel, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello, I'm Joel, and I primarily get around Somerville on my bike, but I also drive sometimes. I also take the bus. I think that if there's any option to maybe do part of the plan on part of Pearl Street and part of it on another. I think my main the main thing I would like to see is 2-way protected bike lanes between Medford Street and not sure what that small street is over there, but basically connecting over onto the Gilman Street neighborway, because that's mostly what I use rather than biking on Pearl Street itself, because it's easier they're more pleasant to go under McGrath and avoid it altogether rather than cross it. So that being able to turn onto whatever that small side street is, the Skilton, I'm sorry, and then continue on the Gilman Street neighborway would be what I would love to see prioritized for bikes.
Thank you, Joel. So next we have Cyril, followed by Mike, followed by Elizabeth. Cyril, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thanks for the time. I live on Pearl Street between James and Bradley. Just wanted to share kind of my experience living on the street so far and the issues that I've seen. First of all, we do see a ton of speeding. And there's a lot of side streets where whether you're pulling out by bicycle, even trying to cross the street, pulling out by car, it's really hard to see those cars coming. I've had several occasions where I'm trying to cross the street and a car either doesn't see me or they don't care. But when I do try to cross the street, they'll aggressively approach me with their car and yell at me. So I totally support, the traffic calming measures that are being proposed today. Specifically, I would like to suggest option 2, especially because, like some of the other folks have mentioned, we really do need some parking and pullover spaces. We're expecting a child. Being able to pull up to our house, we don't have a driveway, is going to be absolutely critical, and I'm sure a lot of people share that sentiment. And maybe one complement to option 2 would be if Pearl Street's going to be one way, then continuing, keeping the Medford Street Bridge open, also as a one way in the opposite direction, perhaps same with the bike lanes. So that could provide a complementary option. And just last thing is, again, safety. From our house, we've seen several incidents, one of which there were, 5 police cars, ambulances. The next day, there was still a blood stain on the street. So we're pretty scared for our kids out here, to be honest. So very much support the traffic calming measures. Thanks for the time.
Thank you so much for sharing, Cyril. So next we have Mike Ayali, followed by Elizabeth Hammond, and that's all who we have for raised hands at this time. So if you want to share your spoken comment or question, please feel free to raise your hand. Mike, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, thank you for the presentation and the work that you've all been doing, and the time to provide some comments. I live right across McGrath Highway from the project area, and I would echo what some of the other cyclists have said, which is that this really isn't a very important connection for us. I do often take the community path to Walnut, and then I'll bike on Pearl Street to get over to my side of McGrath Highway. And in general, it's really the potholes that are the biggest safety issue for me personally. I would really applaud what the city has done on Cross Street over on my side of the neighborhood. The speed bumps, the traffic calming measures, the extended sidewalks at some of the intersections, daylighting the intersections, all of those really make a huge, huge difference to me when I'm cycling down the street. And the other really beneficial thing about Cross Street is it gets people to and from the path, which is this amazing piece of infrastructure. And it just seems like some of the bike network priorities were done without really taking into account being able to get people to and from that path, as opposed to just sort of paralleling the path and providing additional options that just take you to the same places.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mike. So next we have Elizabeth, and then David's raised his hand again. We are going to prioritize those who haven't spoken first. But again, if we have time, we'll definitely come back to some who have additional comments and questions. So Elizabeth, you should be able to unmute now.
Thank you. I don't live on Pearl Street either. I live on the corner of School and Medford Street, so I interact with Pearl Street a lot, both on bike, by car, by transit, on foot. It's like right there. And I have to be honest, right now, I don't bike on Pearl Street if I can help it. I don't drive on Pearl Street if I can help it, because there's no line painted down the middle of it. People could go 10 miles an hour. People could go 40 miles an hour. People have zoomed around me because I was doing the speed limit in my car. So in general, I just avoid it like the plague. So the idea of traffic calming measures, clearly marked lanes of travel, and usable sidewalks is just mind-blowingly exciting, regardless of which option you choose. So I just want to say thank you for all of your work and all of your dedication to making this a usable roadway. I know that right now a lot of people use it to avoid Broadway or otherwise get around some of the tricky parts, or they live right there in the area. But I look forward to it being a usable roadway, because right now it's just a little bit terrifying. And so I'm glad you're doing this work. And I look forward to doing more reading. And I'm wondering whether there will be, so I have a question rather than just a comment. I'm wondering if there would be traffic examinations of how these changes would impact the surrounding streets, given that this is this little side street that's turned into a cut through in a community that used to be a bedroom community of Boston 50 years ago and is now a city in and of itself. Will the examination of traffic patterns consider the larger neighborhood that this section of the street exists in?
Happy to quickly answer that, and just say, if the option that showed converting Pearl Street to a one-way for vehicles, that's the primary option that will require a detailed traffic analysis. Generally speaking, if we're not changing the direction of travel or changing how intersections work otherwise, the effects will be a little more limited, although, we do anticipate that extensive traffic calming does tend to slow people down and also tend to discourage people from using the street, as you describe, as a cut through. But yes, definitely, if Pearl Street were to be made one way, it would involve a detailed traffic analysis that doesn't just include Pearl Street. It would look at the wider neighborhood. A similar analysis was done as a part of the Gilman Street streetscape design about the Medford Street Bridge closure, and it includes things like signal timing changes, pavement marking updates, turn lanes, that sort of thing at a variety of locations around. So yes, we'll be looking closely at that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Elizabeth. So next we have two hands raised. These are folks who have shared their comments before, but I don't see any new hands raised. So we will give some time, but we do ask if you can keep to about approximately 2 minutes, just in case we have any new folks who want to raise their hands. So next is David Tatarakis, followed by Aaron Bickle. David, you should be on unmute now.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I know I spoke before, so I'll be as brief as I can, but I feel like there are two pieces of context that we're overlooking. One is that people have said a few times that Pearl Street doesn't connect to anything for the bike network. And that is kind of true right now. But again, the increasing bike lanes on Medford Street, that won't be true forever. And the big thing I think people are forgetting is that the state is planning a massive redesign of McGrath to a boulevard. And if you've looked at the renders of that, there will be protected bike lanes in both directions. It should be really nice. And again, yeah, maybe that's a long ways off, but we make plans for the long term, not for the short term. So I think that that's an important piece of context as well, is that it will become more important as those changes are made. And the other thing about the community path, I've heard a couple of people refer to it as a bike path. The community path is not a bike path. It is a shared path for pedestrians and bicycles. And as someone who uses it as both a pedestrian and a cyclist every single day, I think if you do that, you should probably know that it does not have the capacity to support the sheer number of people who walk and cycle through Somerville. It is really important that we have alternative routes, especially for people who want to go faster on a bike, because it's not safe for people to go at high speeds on a bike on the community path. There are a lot of pedestrians, and they deserve to have space to walk without people zooming by them at high speeds. So it's important that we have alternative routes and don't act like the community path is a cure-all for people getting across the city on a bicycle. I think that's a mistake that people make a lot, and it really holds back these conversations. So that's all I had to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So next we have Aaron Bickle, followed by Antonietta Pinto. Aaron, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, it's written as Aaron Bickle, so if it's possible, could you just share your name?
Yeah, sorry. So this is Mary Kate Zipprich. Aaron's my husband. We also shared our link with some neighbors, so there might be several of us dialed in under Aaron's name. But I live on Wigglesworth Street as well, obviously. I just wanted to reiterate, I think someone touched on it, briefly about loading and unloading babies. I think also, the old folks home on Pearl Street does have a driveway, but for anyone who has mobility challenges or elderly parents that they're working with, I can't stress enough the importance of having a loading zone there, or the ability to pull over to park briefly at least, to help folks in and out of the car. I think everything has already been said about the bicycling stuff, that it's not a major artery for us. But I do think people are going to pull over regardless of whether there's a flex zone there or not to do their loading and unloading. So just want to stress the importance of that so we don't end up like Davis or some of the areas around Central Square where there's just folks stopped left and right and, no safe place to pull over and unload, but that doesn't stop people from doing it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing. So next we have Antonietta Pinto, and that's the only hands raised in the queue. Antonietta, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, I just have a question. I believe it's option 2 that it's a one-way. I believe is that correct?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, Justin will just pull the slide back up, and then we can show the summary of changes or summary of options if that's helpful.
Okay, so I'm just concerned if I want to know which way would it be one way towards McGrath, or because I want to know how would I get out of my Wigglesworth Street to go into McGrath Highway to go to work. Okay. Two-way bike, one-way vehicle. So it is option 2.
That's correct. And at this time, we cannot say which direction it would be. But there will be a way to circulate in both directions, regardless of which option is chosen using other streets. So if we were to proceed with this option, we're going to look at, which option would, what the different impacts would be of the different directions we could choose in terms of traffic and in terms of access to destinations. Take into account the surrounding street network. What are the one ways that are already intersecting with the street? But at this time, we can't say which direction it would be, unfortunately.
Okay, well, that's a very big concern for me, because I want to be able to come out of my driveway and go right into McGrath Highway, which is right there, and go to work. The other, I only had one question, but I do have another question. The other side of McGrath Highway, on Pearl Street, all you guys did was basically you left all the parking. You just basically just fixed the sidewalks and paved the roadway. So why can't it be the same way on this side of the street? Is it because of all the traffic that goes into McGrath Highway? But there's traffic coming from McGrath Highway the other side too. So I don't know why making all these changes in this small area. That's a little bit confusing to me. Why make so many changes in this small area? So if I would appreciate if you could just explain that to me a little bit more. Why not the other side of the Pearl Street, and why this side of the Pearl Street?
Thanks for that question. The primary reason is that this section is designated for protected bike lanes in the bike network plan vision. You can see that circled in the black dotted line on this slide. The first block of Pearl Street is designated as a neighborway on the other side of McGrath. That means a low volume street that's not a cut through, that has, very low vehicle volumes, low enough where people feel safe biking without a protected bike lane. And then just off the screen, further down Pearl Street, which was the majority of that project you were talking about, that section of Pearl Street is actually not a part of the bike network plan. So the difference in the designation in our plans was the primary difference for what's being proposed here versus what was proposed there.
And who decided that? Who decided that this section should be for the bike lane? Who decided that? Do you have like a committee or?
Sure, we went through a whole year of community meetings online because we were in COVID during that time, but we had many people expressing an interest in connecting from to East Somerville, and the what the previous, I think it was David, had mentioned, that there is a desire to connect both by car and by bicycle to McGrath and further to East Somerville. And so, as Justin just said, the volumes on the other side of McGrath were lower, that we felt like a neighbor way is appropriate, whereas cars do travel, we know that, and we've seen that, and we have the numbers down Medford Street and use Pearl to get to McGrath. So in order to combine safe driving and safe bicycle riding, we chose to, or all over our network, that's when we have protected bicycle lanes.
Okay. We're going to have many more discussions about this, and I think it is important because as much as I want safety for this area, I also want very much to have parking and the option of going to work and not making a huge U-turn to go to work when I'm right here near McGrath Highway. And I think it can be done, and that's why I like option 3. But I mean, many people that are here today, and I mean, we are here to discuss ideas, and I think it is important that we have our input about this, because I am very concerned. I'm very concerned about how there's going to be backlogged on Pearl Street. Very concerned about leaving Wigglesworth to go on Pearl Street. Very concerned about parking. And I'm actually very concerned about the safety. I think this creates a big safety issue because there will be so much traffic. I think it's a big safety issue. So I just, but thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonietta. So next we have Matthew Carlino, and that's all the hands we have raised at this time. Matthew, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I guess my comment is kind of, this is like a chicken or the egg thing, because we've been talking for years about the goal of one day, hopefully, maybe there might be a Gilman Square that, I don't know, people would want to take a bicycle to. But that does not seem like it's being advanced, and there's probably a lot of frustration within the community that it seems like Pearl Street is the first street safety bike redesign, because Medford Street just had zero safety or bicycle infrastructure incorporated into it. But everybody's trying to figure out, and like I understand the bike network is like thinking 30 years into the future, and hopefully in 30 years there might be a Gilman Square. But it seems like a lot of the frustration that some of the callers have is right now there's nowhere for you to want to bike in this neighborhood from this one project. So I guess, how do you remedy that? Or how do you kind of make that more clear in, I guess, the development of this, is that this will probably be a bike lane that for, I don't know, 7 to 10 years just empties at a train station that has a lot of people that still need to drive their car or bike out of this neighborhood to go to amenities because there's really nothing here.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Matthew. So I don't see any other additional hands raised. So folks, maybe I can just reiterate some of the next steps, and if there are no additional questions. Okay, wonderful. Maybe Justin, if you just take us back to the what's next slide, I just want to reiterate to folks, just thank you for giving your time this evening. We really appreciate you signing on during your evening to come learn more about the project and continue to talk with us around ways that we can improve the street. We are going to launch a bunch of these opportunities in the coming week. So as we mentioned, our survey, we'll have our street outreach pop-up. And then we also have our community walk with the Pedestrian Transit Advisory Committee. We're going to send you a follow-up email after this meeting, probably in the coming days, with the presentation slides, a recording of this meeting, and all details about these next steps so that you have easy links to get to the survey or to learn more about the street outreach pop-up. And I'll have our contact info right there so you can reach out anytime with any of your questions. So we really look forward to being in dialogue with you as we look to develop a safer Pearl Street. Thank you so much for giving your time this evening. Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
would it be all right if I close out with a quick comment?
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone, this is Matt McLaughlin again, Ward 1 City Councilor. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I think we had about 40 people here tonight, which is pretty good for what we're talking about. I don't want to weigh in on the three options just yet because I want to hear what people have to say, but I do want to mention a fourth point that I felt was either directly or indirectly mentioned, which is the neighborway off of Skilton Street and the Walnut Street Park, because I did bring that up in private conversations as a potential enhancement or alternative to Pearl Street itself. I ride my bike everywhere and I very rarely go on Pearl Street, as several people said. But I use that neighborway cut through Walnut Street along Skilton Street, which runs parallel to Pearl. And I really feel like I just want to throw that out there because I think it was mentioned as not an option this time around. But I really hope we do consider it because it sounded like several people made that point that there are, if we had that as an enhancement, a curb cut and some paint would definitely, I would use that path a lot more. I think other people would too, and it might address other problems. But other than that, I just want to thank everyone for attending and looking forward to the next steps. And I know everyone's going to have an opportunity to have their voice heard again.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Kling, would you like to say something too?
Yeah, just I want to thank everybody for their really thoughtful feedback. I took it all in. Very good comments in the chat, and then verbal comments as well. So I'm just glad to have such an engaged community. So I'm just thinking about what I've been hearing tonight and kind of how it all fits together with the bicycle plan and what people have to say. So I'll be listening, and hopefully there'll be lots more engagement on this in the future.
Thank you so much. Just want to thank you all again for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care.